Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Latched Mama podcast. The sun is shining in Richmond, Virginia today. Holy moly. It has been raining and icing and snowing for like a week straight, and it's starting again in the middle of the night tonight. But today, the sun is out, and it is amazing. We are coming to you guys today to talk a little bit about breastfeeding, which is, you know, kind of our bread and butter at Latched Mama. We like to ignore it sometimes because it can be polarizing, but we are going to talk breastfeeding 101. We are going to strip it down, talk a little bit, strip it down, funny skin to skin joke there. We're going to talk about the basics, a little bit about some of the science behind it, the do's, the don'ts, all that jazz. So I hope you enjoy it. You're listening to the Latched Mama podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wirt, business owner and tired mom of 5. Join us each week as we talk about pregnancy, nursing, parenting, and all things motherhood. At some point, this pandemic is going to end, and it will not be Lindi and I coming to you guys every podcast. But until then, we're going to get together and we're going to chat and we're going to hang out. And Lindi and I are both CLCs. For those of you who don't know, it's a certified lactation counselor, which is kind of one step down from an IBCLC. So the IBCLC is kind of like the bread and butter. A lot of those practice in hospitals, private practice. They've changed kind of the qualifications in the last few years. To become an IBCLC, it's very hard outside of becoming a nurse first. The prereqs are pretty strict there, and then the hours in the hospital as well. So at Latched Mama, we have a multitude of people on staff that are CLCs. So we have some breastfeeding knowledge. We technically could practice, I believe, as lactation counselors, but we just kind of, you know, answer questions as they come our way, help mamas out when they don't know where to go and have questions. Because if we all agree on one thing, it's that breastfeeding isn't always easy, and there's absolutely not enough support.
Yep.
Right?
I agree.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
So where should we start? Should we start at okay, so what we're going to do is we've compiled like our top 5 like most frequently asked questions at Latched Mama about breastfeeding. And we're going to kind of go through them. I don't have to look at my phone for the first one, because the first one is always what are the first few things I can do to make sure that I can breastfeed my child? Because it's very interesting. Like, we've come to a point kind of in society where like we're not empowering moms anymore in terms of breastfeeding. Like, I think there are a lot of people who are scared it's not going to work. A lot of people who don't exactly know what they can do to make sure that they get off on the right foot if it's something that's important to them. Mm-hmm. And it's all stuff that you can work on while you're pregnant. And I 100% encourage people to do so. Did you take a breastfeeding class before your first was born?
I did, but I still was not prepared.
Did you learn? Do you remember what you learned? Were there any takeaways?
It was a long time ago. No. But I have to say, and this is one of my things, and we can get into it later, but when I learned about all this, I really kind of thought it was an either or thing. And that
is a huge
we can get into
misconception. That. Absolutely.
Yes. So yeah, it's a very stressful thing.
Yeah. And it's an either or thing like in society, because like moms get mad at each other, and it doesn't have to be. Like, we all can live harmoniously together. But for those of you who want to breastfeed, there are benefits to breastfeeding. I mean, you can't argue with science. Like, you can't argue with the fact that it is a biologically created substance for your child that they are supposed to be consuming out of the womb. You can't really technically argue with that. So if you have decided that breastfeeding is something you want to do, there are classes that you can take while you're pregnant. Most hospitals, I believe, offer probably a free class. I know I took one. I don't remember much about it either. I remember they were dolls and they were like fake boobs. But there wasn't anything, and this is like, I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but it's almost like a lot of stuff prenatally. Like, nobody's going to tell you that things feel so incredibly overwhelming. Your identity has changed. Your life is turned upside down, but you're going to remember the fake boob and the baby from class? No, you're not. You're going to be staring at this little thing and realize that you have to keep it alive from something that's going to come out of your body, and you've got to somehow make it work.
Or you see these blissful pictures.
Yeah.
And it's really not.
It's not.
It's not for a while.
It can be a train wreck kind of the first few days. So prepare all you can prior to having your baby. So classes, there are a lot of online resources as well. I know there are a lot of like e-classes that you can take and research. But then I think you really need to focus on your care provider and advocating for yourself and making sure that your wishes are known. Depending on how your birth goes, you do sometimes lose a little bit of control. There are things that are going to be completely out of your control. And I'm not going to say, hey, if your baby gets some formula right after it's born because its blood sugar is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, you've ruined your breastfeeding relationship and you're never going to be able to breastfeed. Like, let go of that stuff. Because I've breastfed successfully 5 kids at this point, and none of them I have supplemented with. But I can tell you right now, like, the amount of stories that we hear from women who are literally in the hospital just after they've given birth, their baby has gotten formula for whatever reason, and suddenly they are a mess because they feel like they're not going to be able to breastfeed.
Yep.
No.
Yeah.
Let it go. I mean, we can talk about whether that baby probably needed the formula. We can talk about nipple confusion. We can talk about what it's like for a baby to nurse or to eat from a bottle versus a breast. Like, we can get into all of that. And yes, it can take some work getting them back to the breast if they've been on bottles for a long time. But for the most part, just take a deep breath and kind of get through those days at the hospital.
And that, just to speak on that stress.
Yeah.
That stress has huge physical effects on your body.
Yeah.
So if you can just take a deep breath and not let that stress overwhelm you and start to get to you, like, you can look at options and everything can kind of be figured out.
Yeah. But, I would make sure that if you have a doula, that your doula knows that you have the desire to breastfeed, which I am going to assume if you have a doula that's worth anything, you'll have talked about that prior to going into labor. Make sure your nurses know that are working with you that breastfeeding is something that's important to you. And educate yourself as much as possible. The science behind breastfeeding. So what's going to happen is after you have your baby, your placenta, which has been feeding your baby while it's been in your womb, is going to detach. And with that, your progesterone and estrogen levels are going to drop. That signals your body to create prolactin, which then creates milk. So we can talk about all of the different ways that process can be hindered with. So if you're looking at like a straightforward vaginal birth with no interventions, you're normally going to have that placenta detach relatively quickly. That baby's going to be skin to skin, and your milk's going to come in relatively quickly. But there are C-sections that sometimes can interfere with how quickly the milk comes in and how quickly you're really able to hold that baby skin to skin. There are traumatic birth experiences, just like what Lindi was saying. Like, you introduce stress, you introduce anxiety, and all of those hormones, just like when you're PMSing and just like in general, they all work against each other and together, and it just creates this little storm inside of you that can hinder your breastfeeding relationship. So I know I talk about it a lot, but it is so incredibly important going into your birth that you have the right care provider and that you literally are advocating for yourself for what you want.
Yes.
I mean, it's just where you start. So start there. Advocate for skin to skin quickly after birth. Most hospitals are doing this. Did you have skin to skin with all of yours?
All of mine. My twins were a little bit different of a story, but by then they were my 5th and 6th, so I was a little more.
Did they were vaginal in the OR, right?
They were both vaginal in the OR. Mm-hmm.
And then did you get to hold them?
Being that they were identical, they had some extra things to go over.
Mm-hmm.
My husband got to hold them right away. I went back to the room. I got to hold them there, but it was maybe close. I don't even remember, but it was close to an hour. But then they were on my chest and
yeah. So skin to skin has a whole lot of biological impacts. Mm-hmm. Your baby's temperature is going to be able to be regulated more. It creates an extensive amount of oxytocin for mommy, which is going to help with lowering any of the stress hormones or anything else that's going to interfere with breastfeeding. So if you can really get that skin to skin, if your baby's handed to you and they're swaddled up in 17 blankets, you 100% have the option to unswaddle them and put them on your chest and lay there skin to skin. Like, do it. Don't, just because a nurse has handed you a baby that is bundled up, that is still your baby, and you are still able to do with it what you want.
You can unbundle and cover both of yourself up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hold the baby. So another thing that we get asked a lot, we get asked a lot all the time, like, how do I increase my milk supply? But we're going to stay in those first few minutes. Breast milk is created by nipple stimulation and draining of the breast. So the more your baby goes to the breast, the more breast milk you are going to make. So just remind yourself of that constantly. Like, the more your baby is on the breast, the more breast milk you're going to make. It is 100% a supply and demand for most women, a supply and demand process. So those first few minutes, those first few hours, those first few days, baby should be at the breast pretty much if the baby's awake. If the baby's awake, the baby should be offered the breast. Yes? You agree with that? For the most part?
Yeah, sure. I think it can be a little overwhelming for a mother.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think that baby needs to either be up there nursing or up on your chest.
Mm-hmm.
You're touching each other.
Absolutely.
Really encouraging that milk production and connection.
So that first milk you make is called colostrum, and it is very, very, very high in antibodies, and it looks a little bit different than your other milk. It's going to be a little bit thicker. It's going to be a little bit more yellow, and the baby's not going to need much of it. If you want to Google like kind of the size of baby stomachs, those first few days, I think it's like the size of a cherry or something. Teeny. It's super small. But what that baby's going to do when the baby goes to the breast is it's going to stimulate the production of milk. So as it clears the colostrum, your body is going to start to create the actual milk. So the more your baby's at the breast, the more your body is going to know that it needs to be making milk. For me, most of the time I have a pretty good 12 hours with baby where, they get a little colostrum and, they kind of go to sleep and they're sleepy and whatever. But it's like that 12 to maybe sometimes 24-hour mark where they turn into little piranhas. Mm-hmm. And even as an experienced mom who understands a lot about breastfeeding, it can sometimes be a little anxiety driven because you're like, oh my gosh, they're not getting what they need. They're not getting what they need. They're not getting what they need. But they're biologically programmed to suck, to suck, to suck, to suck, to suck, to suck, to suck. And it goes from these kind of, after those first couple feedings, after they're born, they're going to sleep for an extended period of time. And then they're going to come through a period of wakefulness where they're hungry, but they're also biologically programmed to find the breast and suck and suck and suck. Try to keep your anxiety down and try and realize in those first couple days that their stomach's not that large yet. They're getting what they need, but they're also doing something that is so important for your body.
But during that time, I would encourage you to ask if you're in the hospital or if you're out of the hospital at home, get that help to come evaluate your latch, because I think women, you get in there and you're like, this is normal. They just need to stay on. But then by the end of 24 hours, your nipple is now in such an awful shape and is just so battered down because you've been nursing, which is incredible, and it's doing good things, but it's been such a poor latch. So now you're in so much pain, but you think I got to still keep doing it. Yeah. So it can kind of get you, we need the support.
But I also think that we're throwing the word latch around so much, and it's not that we're scaring moms, but most babies are biologically programmed to suck the nipple. And if given the opportunity, are going to have a decent latch. Now, I personally would research as a mom, if I'm sitting here not not with baby yet, research kind of what a good latch looks like. It's not what you would think. It's probably not what you see. I guess you probably don't see a whole lot of breastfeeding on TV, but it's a very, very deep process. Almost your entire areola like ends up in the baby's mouth. So if I would say anything, if you're kind of assessing your latch yourself prior to getting help or prior to being able to get in with a lactation consultant or see one in the hospital, the latches needs to be very deep. Like that entire nipple needs to be in the baby's mouth. And there's other things that you can learn while you're pregnant in terms of watching videos and stuff on what an actual latch looks like and how the suck swallow process kind of goes as well. But yeah, I would use every single resource you possibly have in the hospital. Right. I don't know. It's so hard because I start talking about this and I'm like, and then you just let them suck. And like, I know personally that I've got to go back to 8 years ago and I've got to remember like that it was terrible. I remember my nipples bled for that first week, but I remember my midwife at the time was just like, the latch is fine. Everything's good. You're doing great. Hang in there. But there was really nothing else they could have told me. Mm-hmm. But like my nipples just had to get used to like being used for something, I guess.
Yeah. So with my first, he ended up in the hospital and I had the worst engorgement ever. And nobody really, or I didn't understand, and nobody taught me, and the IBCLC on staff never really said, hey, you're so swollen that the milk can't come out, you're producing. But I sat there pumping like a maniac because he was now in the ICU and I didn't really know how to breastfeed. And no one just kind of slowed me down and said, hey, take an anti-inflammatory. Yep. It's going to kick in and get rid of that swelling so that we can get the milk out. And you don't need to make this fine hop of doing, I can only do one or the other. Yeah. Let's get some milk going, keep your supply going, and let's go back and let's work on a latch and getting baby to you. But I couldn't hold him all the time. But nobody shared with me about engorgement and how that can happen. And it was huge. It was a huge hindrance. Yeah. Into figuring that out.
That's like the other side of the supply and demand. Like it all goes back to that. So we're talking about how to increase your supply, like how to get your milk to come in. And for most moms, I think it comes in for 3 to 5 days after they have their baby. And for everything that I'm saying, there are definitely outliers on each side of every woman's body and every birth, and everything is different. But the other side of this is what happens if you begin making too much milk. So your body is basically going to have to figure stuff out. It doesn't necessarily know how many babies you've had. It doesn't know if you've had twins or triplets or one baby. It doesn't even know if you want to breastfeed. I mean, even if the baby doesn't go to the breast, you're still going to end up making milk at some point. Most people do. But what Lindi was talking about in terms of engorgement is when your body just makes a whole lot of milk. And for most women, relief is what they search for. Let's think about this. You've just either pushed a baby out of your vagina, you've had major abdominal surgery. And now not only is like your butt hurting and your like vagina and your belly maybe, but all of a sudden also your boobs hurt and like you feel like literally you have milk up to your chin. Yeah. And it's hard and it's uncomfortable. You're looking forward to sleeping on your stomach your entire pregnancy, and now suddenly you can't because it's so painful. So for most women, there is going to be a little bit of engorgement or a full feeling when your milk comes in. And it's something to definitely get used to. But for some, it gets somewhat extreme. And the solution, the quick solution and the easy solution, because we're a consumer-based society, is to get your breast pump out and to pump. But if we go backwards,
because you think it's something, think it's something that needs to come out. But there's that combination of milk and swelling.
Absolutely. And then you get to the point though, where you're like, ding, ding, ding. I wish we had like a whole like student class right now. Like, what did we talk about? Supply and demand. Your body doesn't know that that's not a baby sucking from your breast. So you're going to pull that milk out, and what's your body going to do? It's going to make more milk. So you get into this kind of system where your body is completely confused. You may feel better for a few minutes, but your body's going to keep making milk. And so you get into this cycle of engorgement and being uncomfortable. And then that can lead to your scary other stuff like clogged ducts and mastitis and stuff like that. So what I have learned from my midwife and from CLC stuff is whatever you can do to get that milk out, the excess milk that the baby doesn't need, apart from stimulating your nipples, is the answer. So for a lot of people, that is like hand expression, which is really interesting. In almost every single country, they teach that to every single woman before they leave the hospital, birth center, their house. Like it's just a standard part of prenatal care and postnatal care, and hand expressing is just a thing. I don't think we do that here, and I would
know why.
And I would love to know: is it the formula industry? Is it the fact that we want to sell breast pumps? I have no idea, but it is something that is so incredibly crucial, because if you can get that milk out and you can help your body figure out how much milk to make without stimulating your nipples, it's going to speed up the process quite significantly in terms of your body figuring out how to get yourself comfortable again. So there are a lot of resources online about hand expression. Warm water helps a great deal with what Lindi was talking about in terms of the inflammation. I was actually just talking with somebody this morning about this. Even just like a warm water, like soak while you're feeding on one side, because you're going to have a natural letdown on the other side. Which, God, we could talk about this all day long. You're going to have a natural letdown on one side. And a lot of people are using Hakas nowadays. Did you have a Haka, or was that after your thing? After. So Hakas are these like solid pieces of kind of silicone that you squeeze and you put over your breast on the side you're not feeding normally. And it basically collects the milk that you would normally lose during the letdown. But it's also stimulating your nipple. So that's where, so that's where you get in problem. If you get in trouble, if you're already engorged and you're using that on one side, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but it's not the same as putting a towel there. It's not the same as taking your breast and kind of leaning over and putting it in some warm water as the milk comes out to get some relief. It's pulling your nipple forward and it's stimulating your nipple and milk production. So, engorgement's a thing. It's not really something to really be ignored. I think some beginning uncomfortableness is kind of to be expected, but severe engorgement needs to be dealt with, in my opinion, because I think it can quickly turn into something like mastitis or clogged ducts and stuff like that. And honestly, all around, it just makes you feel really icky.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And mine was awful, and it was prior to pumping, because he was at the breast all through the hospital the first 2 days, and then we moved. But it was such a hindrance to get that milk out. And once it was gone, I was like producing wonderfully.
Did you end up having an oversupply from that experience?
I don't know about at the beginning, because he was on the breast for 2 days. Like we did everything, we were needing to do.
Yeah.
And then that engorgement hit, and obviously it was my first. I had no idea what to do.
Yeah. It's
not
a comfortable.
It was awful.
It's not a comfortable.
So then I was
feeling.
terrified into my second. But it all worked out.
So another question we get, and this is like the number one breastfeeding question, and I think a lot of it has to do with how women feel after they have babies and whether they feel supported and all of that stuff. But how do I know I'm making enough milk for my baby? Go ahead, Lindi. How do you know you're making enough milk for your baby?
It's a very hard thing, because this milk goes from you can't see it into this baby, and you can't see it. And I think a lot of people put, they're like, oh, I can pump and see that. Because guess
what happens, guys? You pump and you see.
But your pump's not going to, your baby's such a pro at extracting that milk from your breast that you can't rely on that pump. But we look at baby's output. We look at their diapers. We look at just generally, like, are they agitated or are they calm and fulfilled? So there's many factors that you can look at.
You hear a lot about being milk drunk. your baby's probably not going to get that milk drunk appearance until your milk comes in. They're not going to get it off the colostrum. They're going to probably act a little hungry while they're trying to get the milk to come in. Once that milk comes in, after feeding, your baby should be pretty relaxed. Their muscles should be loose. You should be able to look at them and like between the oxytocin that you made while you produced the milk and them relaxing and stuff, there should be moments probably in that should calm your nerves and your anxiety a little bit. There is also mother's intuition. Like if you're feeling like something is not right, you need to find your resources and you need to reach out. But weight gain is also another one of those things. I had one that 1, 2, 3. I have to count which child he was. Number 4 that gained really, really slowly. And he might have had some reflux stuff going on. He didn't spit up much, but might have been silent reflux. Who knows? But he gained really, really slowly until he didn't. And then he gained super fast. I think babies gain on their own curves, but having a really good pediatrician that's going to support you and realize that, I think is also really important.
Right.
What else?
And maybe it's off topic, but I remember with one, and it might have been my second, when I was like really, the breastfeeding really worked well and I was feeling successful. And at the beginning, I had such a powerful letdown.
Yep.
And so the baby, he was just angry with me. And he didn't want to nurse. Why doesn't he want to nurse? And I'm like, okay, then I kind of learn about some positions and kind of lean back and get baby on top so they can kind of control and it's not sport. So, there's some other things that can kind of go along and you're like, I'm making milk. Well, what's wrong? Why don't they want to drink? And, you can kind of look into switching a position and trying some other things.
And that's when hand expressing comes in super handy as well. If you can hand express through that letdown, that super high powered shoot across the room milk is hopefully going to be out of the way and baby's not going to get as choked or angry when they're actually nursing. But like, I can probably tell you that if you're seeing milk and you're making milk, these issues that we're talking about, they're so common. And I hate even to use the word issues. Like they're just obstacles. I don't even know if they're obstacles, but like we get them probably, I don't know, these same questions, probably 4 to 5 times a day at Latch Mama. Just the whole, am I making enough milk? My baby's pulling away from the breast. What does it mean? Cluster feeding is also something. Sometimes women feel like they're not making enough milk after. So like you're a few weeks in, baby's gaining, baby's outputting fine, but all of a sudden baby wants to be on the breast all the time. Does that mean that their milk supply has dropped?
No.
What does that mean, Lindi?
Baby's going through growth spurt. Baby realizes like, I need more. I need more sustenance to have this brain development, and I'm growing, and they're there for a reason to bring in more milk. And the more that they're there, soon you're going to see over a period of time, 24 to 48 hours, you're going to see that milk production drastically go up. You're obviously not visually going to see it, but hopefully you'll see that baby, come back down a little bit more and space those out a little bit more if they want to. Yeah. But there's no rhyme or reason. There's no exact answer as to what that looks like.
Those first few months, you are going to be underneath your baby. Like literally your baby is going to be breastfeeding constantly. And like, that's just, is that bad to say? It's kind of the truth.
I think it can feel overwhelming to hear.
Yeah. I don't mean to overwhelm anybody.
And I hope that people know that it's 100% normal, but also what you're going through is absolutely important.
Yeah.
So, I have known, and through a couple of my pregnancies, I've struggled mentally, whether it is postpartum depression or whatnot. And that can be difficult when you're needed all the time.
Yeah.
But that needing all the time is 100% normal. So,
because what's going to happen is that the breast is not just a form of food.
No.
The breast is going to be a form of comfort. It's going to be a form of connection. It's going to be a form of safety for your baby. And as they grow, it's going to continue being that. So there are going to be some times where you're not even really eating. Like you're just sitting here on it and you're kind of sucking, but I can't even get up to make dinner, or I can't help the other kid because you just want to lie here and you want to be on the breast. It's going to happen. It's normal. and as they get older, you can sometimes distract them. But in those first few months, like, they just want you. And it's just this amazing, selfless gift that we either decide to give them.
And I don't know if there's certain weeks, but from what I've kind of learned and definitely seen in my kids, that, those first kind of 3 to 4 weeks is a very pivotal point as far as supply. I've never had a kid that like sleeps through the night after like day 3, but I would be a little worried to go kind of 6 to 12 hours at night without that milk being drawn out of your breast as far as for supply. But just like what we've been saying, like, the more you can get baby to your breast, the more you can kind of establish a good supply.
Yeah. I mean, normally by that 6-week mark, your body's going to pretty much be regulated, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have growth spurts or you're not going to have times.
But just how important it is. And I think we've stressed that for that beginning.
If you do need to build a freezer stash, my advice, and professional or not, is to give your body a little bit of time before you do that. Give your body a little bit of time to regulate what your baby needs, get in that relationship before you introduce the pump. But I've always had most success with a morning pump after the baby feeds. That's normally when I've been able to see the most milk. So, wake up, or if you ever went to sleep, but do that good morning feed, and then try and pump and try and get your bottle in the freezer or wherever you're storing it at that point, if building a supply is something important to you. Cool. Anything else about those beginning weeks? Breastfeeding is natural, but it's not easy. And anybody who tells you that it's easy either had a really, really good go at it or had really, really good support. We don't make it extremely easy for moms, especially in the United States, to breastfeed. It's very rare that your baby's going to have a great latch completely out of the womb. And if they do, there's always the chance that you're going to have questions and you're going to have, normal anxiety about whether you're making enough. Because like you said, it's this unseen thing. You can't see what's going into baby. You just kind of have to trust that it's all going well. So it all goes back to everything I preach, pick the right care provider, pick the right doula, have people in your life that are going to be there for you on the other side. And it's not just swaddle blankets and pretty coming home from the hospital outfits. Like, this is really, really important stuff that if you do have the headspace to think about it while you're still pregnant, do it, and get the resources in place.
And I don't know if you felt that way, but each kid was different. And every time there was a big part of me that like it felt new. And each experience can be very different. And, show kind of different little issues and different things. And, just because you nursed like multiple kids doesn't mean the next one is going to be a breeze.
Yeah. And you have to teach them all. Like that's the whole thing, is they don't
You're
come
both
out
learning.
Yeah.
Yes,
they come out, I know I said biologically, instinctively. Like, most babies will know that the breast is someplace to find food, but most babies aren't going to know that they can't really be lazy and they've got to open their mouth really, really wide. And sometimes you have to pull them off and show them and make sure that they're where they need to be. And you'll absolutely learn to do that with the right resources in your life. And they're out there. They're really, really hard to find sometimes because we're not doing a great job. But there are so many people out there that are willing to help. So message us. We're on chat all the time. Email. We will find you local resources if you need it. But yeah, I hope this was helpful.
We didn't really say a whole lot, but nutrition and staying hydrated, all of those are just so important for everything, milk production, your mental health, and all of that.
Try to get some sleep. And like, it just starts to snowball though. Like, when you don't have support in other parts of your life, the things that you can't measure, like milk production and whether you're doing a good job as a mom, it all just starts to snowball. So take care of yourself and try and find those resources, and you're going to be okay. Well, thanks, Lindi.